Are you someone that's suffering from chronic acid reflux? Have you been looking for solutions only to find that most of what is out there has only been providing you with temporary relief or no relief at all? In this video, I'm going to share with you my experience navigating chronic acid reflux for almost 2 decades. I'm going to share with you the mistakes that I've made on this journey, as well as the key learnings and solutions that I wish I knew back when this condition first developed. Now this is going to be the first in a series of videos because it's going to be hard to cover all these aspects from 2 decades in just one single video and do it justice. Now I invite you to subscribe to my channel and join me on this journey to navigating mind, body and soul wellness and to help unlock your best self. And as always, please remember that none of what I am going to share with you today is considered medical advice. This is for informational purposes only. Okay, so let's get right into it. I'm first going to start by sharing with you my story. I'm going to help you understand how I navigated through the last 20 years leading up until now. Because this is going to help to better contextualize my experience as well as provide that deeper sense of resonance for what I'm going to share with you in later videos. Now, in order for me to do this, I need to wind back the clocks of time and take you back in time to when this condition first developed. So let's go right there. So welcome to the year 1950. I'm not taking you that far back in time. I wasn't even born in the 1950s. I'm taking you back in time to the early 2000s. At that stage, I was still in high school. And that's when my symptoms or my exposure to the acid reflux symptoms first started. And it started off as these occasional symptoms of acid reflux that would be triggered by very spicy meals or meals that would be considered somewhat acidic. At that stage, I didn't really make too much of the acid reflux symptoms. I'd often gravitate to quick fix solutions like Eno or taking a glass of cold milk just to extinguish that burning sensation. And oftentimes that used to work fairly well for solving those occasional symptoms of acid reflux. But as time progressed, those symptoms started to become chronic. Now, in order for me to help you understand what contributed to the chronic acid reflux, I need to give you insight into my diet and my lifestyle at the time. Because upon reflection, those aspects potentially were the primary causes of the chronic acid reflux. So let's get into my diet. Now my diet, I used to love Indian foods, and my diet was predominantly comprised of Indian foods. My mom was probably the best Indian cook I could ever ask for. She made these really delicious Indian curries that I would consume on a regular basis. Now my favorite foods used to be all those Indian savory foods, the fried foods, think of samosas. Also used to love those paneer curries and biryanis, you name it. I loved those foods. But I used to also consume a lot of the Western foods as well. So think about potato chips, biscuits. All those foods also comprised of my fairly regular diet. Occasionally I would also have pizzas and burgers, and I used to love foods that had a lot of gluten. So think roti, think about naan bread, all those gluten products is what I used to also love. Cakes, you name it. So that's in terms of the diet that I generally followed. Now I thought I was being fairly healthy by avoiding things like sodas and avoiding your sweets, chocolates, things like that had high sugar content. Now, in terms of my lifestyle, at the time, I had a lot of performance pressure. Traditional Indian home, as a child, I was pressured into performance, and a lot of that caused stress, and I often didn't have a lot of sleep. I was sleeping probably 5 hours a day, and all these factors potentially also contributed to the high stress levels and potentially poor health in hindsight. Now, there you go in terms of understanding the factors that potentially contributed to the acid reflux becoming chronic. Because over time, almost everything that I would consume would give rise to chronic acid reflux. And once it started to become more and more prevalent in my life, eventually my parents said, you can't keep gravitating towards Eno and milk. It's becoming chronic, it's becoming really bad. It's time to go and see a doctor. And so I decided to go and see a doctor. And as part of this, I'm going to now take you into the next phase of this journey. Next, I go and see the doctor. And the doctor tells me that these symptoms of acid reflux that I'm experiencing is seen fairly regularly in patients that come and see him. And he's going to prescribe me some medication to take for about 2 or 3 weeks, and that should eradicate the chronic acid reflux symptoms. At that stage, I didn't really know much about health, so I thought, well, it's a doctor's job to be responsible for my health. I can go about making all these unhealthy choices and then go to the doctor and say, hey, fix me. It's unfortunate that I had that mindset or framework of thinking at the time. So getting back into this phase, so I go on to take the prescription medication. I take the prescription medication for about 2 weeks. I feel a lot better, but as soon as I eat those trigger foods, I still have those occasional acid reflux symptoms, but at least it's not as regular as what it was. I go back to the doctor because as soon as I leave the medication, all these acid reflux symptoms come back. And doctor tells me, well, the medication that I've prescribed you is actually omeprazole. It's a PPI, which is a proton pump inhibitor, which stops the body from producing too much, or the stomach from producing too much acid, so that the excess acidity doesn't find its way back into your esophagus and create that burning sensation. So we need to double the dosage because your stomach's probably producing too much of acid. And being naive at the time, I'm like, sure, if that's going to solve the problem. And so I ended up with the double dosage of the PPI. I go back, take the PPIs, double the dosage, and the acid reflux symptoms are gone. But as soon as I leave the PPI, so I've been taking it for potentially a month or longer at this stage, I go back to the doctor and say, I can't leave these drugs. As soon as I leave the PPI, the acid reflux just comes gushing back and is miserable. And at this stage, my parents tell me we've got to go and see a specialist. We can't continue just increasing the dosage of the PPI. And so the doctor recommends that I go and see a specialist. Go and see the specialist. He does a gastroscope, takes a biopsy. The results come back and it says that I have something called H. pylori, which is a bacteria that is responsible for producing a lot of the acid in the stomach, and which is potentially causing the acid reflux that you're experiencing. I go on a course of antibiotics to help eradicate the H. pylori. That was about a week, and I felt nasty during this period of being on the antibiotics. I felt so sick and miserable, but I thought it was probably doing something. It's probably some sort of die-off reaction that's taking place and helping me get better. But as soon as the course is finished and I drop the medication and I stop the PPI, the acid reflux just comes back. Probably with a vengeance and so much worse than what it was before. I go back to the specialist. He tells me, I see these in patients where they need to be on these drugs lifelong. If it's not the H. pylori that's causing it, your stomach is just producing too much of acidity, and that is what's causing the acid reflux. Being naive at the time, I take his word as truth, and I said, okay, fine. If that's what's going to solve my problem and allow me to live a normal life, then I probably need to be on these PPIs. I also end up in a situation where when the acid reflux becomes really bad, I'm allowed to increase the dosage. The specialist said it's fine if you increase the dosage and then just drop it back down when the symptoms alleviate. So I end up going on the cycle of increasing the PPIs when it gets really bad, decreasing it, but going on PPIs for a fairly long-term basis, not being able to live without it. But during that stage of being on PPIs on a long-term basis, I was always trying to look for opportunities to try and reduce the dosage of the PPIs. But whenever I'd done that, I would experience the acid reflux symptoms again and again. I started to look more into the diet and the foods that I was eating at this stage, trying to see if I could carve out or reduce certain foods. And so my diet became very restrictive because I started to eliminate a lot of foods that would trigger the acid reflux. So I stopped eating spicy foods, I stopped eating certain spices that would trigger acid reflux, started doing a lot of the other practices such as, sleeping upright, eliminating chocolates, eliminating all those things that I used to love to eat as part of this to try and see if I could reduce the PPIs or my dependence on the PPIs. Because oftentimes what happens with the PPIs is because it stops the stomach from producing acid, it still causes regurgitation, but it's not the burning sensation regurgitation because none of the foods are actually digesting, and a lot of what is being released through fecal matter still has a lot of undigested foods, meaning that the body is not really able to then absorb a lot of the nutrients because it's not breaking down in the normal fashion that it should. My goal was ultimately to try and get off these PPIs, but it wasn't going to be an easy journey. So in this next phase, I'm going to take you through my journey trying to wean off these PPIs, which have become so addictive and something that I've become so dependent on. And this next part of the journey is going to take you through that process of me trying to wean myself off these drugs. One of my main reasons for wanting to wean off these PPIs and be free of acid reflux was the risks of taking these PPIs for a very long time, almost close to a decade, was starting to now outweigh the benefits. I was starting to develop malabsorption of critical vitamins and nutrients, and I was having to supplement with a whole lot more in order to be able to sustain my energy levels and level of activity. At the same time, it was creating a very hospitable environment for a lot of the bad bacteria and viruses to be able to flourish in my body. And that's because the PPIs reverse the normal digestive process. It eliminates the acids. It stops the stomach from producing these acids that are needed in order to digest the foods. That is why a lot of the fecal matter contains undigested foods, because a lot of the normal digestive process is not taking place. And this is also what causes a lot of the poor nutrient absorption, and why I was so determined to try and wean off these PPIs and get to a state where I could not experience acid reflux and also feel pretty healthy and not susceptible to a lot of the viruses and illnesses out there. And this took me down so many different rabbit holes because it was such an arduous process to try and get off these PPIs. I'd become so dependent on this PPI to be able to not experience acid reflux. And the minute I tried to drop it or to reduce my dosage, the acid reflux would just come gushing back at me. And I needed to find a solution to getting off these PPIs. Now, like I said, I've been through so many different rabbit holes trying to find a solution to the acid reflux. I tried Siberian pine nut oil. I tried mastic gum. I went down the leaky gut rabbit hole. There's so many different things that I went down to try and find the solution to the acid reflux. And unfortunately, none of them really provided me with that lasting healing and making a huge difference, besides working really hard at altering my diet and slowly finding the ideal diet that would work for me. And unfortunately, it brought about a lot of dietary restrictions. Now we'll cover the dietary practices in a later video. But for now, what I will say is that eliminating gluten and coming across this book called Breaking the Vicious Cycle was my catalyst towards delving deeper into this rabbit hole of diet and really understanding what could bring me the healing that I needed and to help me wean off the PPIs. But weaning off those PPIs was not easy, because each time I went down a rabbit hole, I would encounter frustrations and I would encounter the acid reflux coming back, and it would get so bad that it would push me back into taking these PPIs. And I'd been back and forth multiple different times, so many different times where I would go down a rabbit hole, try it out, and the acid reflux would come back and I would just revert to taking the PPIs again. Ultimately, I reached a stage after I read this book. I was like, I know gluten's an issue. I know dairy might be a potential issue as well. And I started to carve out a lot of things from my diet. But I had not known as much as I should have known about how I should go about getting off these PPIs. I reached a stage where I was like, I'm going to work with what I know. I took all those tablets that I had, I chucked them in the bin, and I was like, I'm moving forward. I've got to get off these PPIs. And that stage was very challenging. I ate very bland food. My food tasted terrible. I was taking cabbage juice, and I didn't have a juicer at the time, so I was blending up the cabbage juice and drinking it. It tasted nasty. It was a very frustrating experience trying to get off these PPIs. I was still consuming some bits of protein because I thought protein was essential at the time. And so I was eating cooked steamed beans, and those are still causing some acid reflux symptoms, but not as severe. But I was off the PPIs and I was determined that I needed to get off it. It was a challenging time. But if I knew what I know now about diet, I could have made that so much more seamless. I would have known better what foods to eliminate, what protocols to bring in. But that experience has taught me so much. And over the next series of videos that I'm going to put out on my journey through healing chronic acid reflux, or at least getting to a stage where I can live without the PPIs and not having to constantly experience acid reflux, can hopefully shed some light on my experience and help you along with your journey. So I hope that this video has helped shed some light on my experience. By no means am I saying that I'm fully healed of my condition, but it feels good to not have to be dependent on a PPI or something that reverses the entire normal digestive process. So thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video.